Good morning. I'd like to welcome honored guests, Dr. Kandel, Ambassador Flynn, President Gosnell, and Superintendent Mears. Thank you very much to Jamie Gass and the Pioneer Institute for its invitation to speak today about the KnowNothings. Now, the KnowNothings were a shadowy group that about 160 years ago dominated national politics for a 2-year period from 1854 to 1856. This group is primarily known for its anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic political agenda, which was stoked by a controversy over Protestant Bible reading in the public schools. Popular history attributes its moniker, KnowNothings, to their practice of secrecy that compelled them to respond, "I know nothing." This foreshadowed by a century the words of the iconic television series Hogan Heroes character, Sergeant Schultz, "I know nothing." So for full disclosure today, I would like to confirm that I am no relation to the sergeant. The Know Nothing group had its origins long before this 2-year period in the mid-19th century. Certainly, they had a full half-century run-up to their flowering between 1854 and 1856. But we can locate those origins in a much longer past. One of the striking things about reviewing the history of anti-Catholicism that led to the formation of the Know Nothing Party is its long pedigree. We can locate its beginnings 500 years ago with Martin Luther appending his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany in 1517, which launched the Protestant Reformation. From its very origin then, the Protestant Church set itself in opposition to Catholicism, not founding something new, but protesting and reforming something long established, and actually making that word protest the root of its name, Protestant. These origins set the protesting sect on a permanent reactionary path. But within this spin-off religion, the adherents couldn't agree on which parts of the original Roman Catholicism to discard and which to keep. These differences eventually led to dissent and splintering. English Protestants originally gave the name Puritans as a term of derision to the dissidents who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But the Puritans adopted it for themselves, kind of like the epithets queer and gay have today been turned into radical names denoting the group's pride. This too is the same way the term Know Nothing was embraced by its adherents, the Nativists, also known in the 19th century as Native Americans. What the Puritans wanted was a return to a pure protest against Catholicism, especially stripping it of its lavish trappings and aesthetic, to more simple and plain worship. In their view, the Anglican Church of England had retained too much Catholic pomp and circumstance of the original Catholic Church. And this is one of the fictions of purity that I am referring to in my title. Native Americans, as the Know-Nothings call themselves, is also a term with an interesting history. When it was coined in the 19th century, the group we today call Native Americans referring to the indigenous peoples of North America, had a completely different name. Following the lead of Columbus and other early explorers, the Indians in those days were not thought of as genuine Native Americans. In fact, the white explorers who first met them thought they were meeting inhabitants of India, a global term used to denote all of South and East Asia. And in 1492, Columbus was convinced he had reached the Indian Ocean. The 19th century Native Americans were nativists, a term that has today taken on a connotation of bigotry toward those not considered American by the dominant culture. Now, nativism is a dynamic and complex web woven of nationalism, xenophobia, ethnocentrism, racism. 19th century Americans called themselves nativist primarily to declare their anti-immigrant sentiment. The Native Americans of the mid-1850s were united by their opposition to immigrants and Catholics, a bigotry that found its deepest expression in debates over the public schools. The famous inventor of the telegraph, Samuel F.B. Morse, was one of the first writers to link Catholicism, what he termed popery, with immigration as a dangerous combination. In 1835, he published his polemical Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States. Well, you've all heard of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code? Well, here is true Morse code. Catholics are the enemy, and I put the dots and dashes underneath. So here's a sample from that work. What Morse said, they will see that popery is now what it has ever been, a system of the darkest political intrigue and despotism, cloaking itself to avoid attack under the sacred name of religion. He signed his name with the pseudonym Brutus. Lyman Beecher, prominent clergyman and father of famous abolitionist Harriet Beecher Stowe, in his book, 1835, A Plea for the West, built on Morse's theory that Catholicism and immigration were America's enemy by extending the conspiracy to Catholic schools. Beecher questioned the reason that religious orders were opening their doors to Protestant children, while many Catholic children were in need. What, he asked, are the motives of these Catholics in neglecting the education of their own children and extending education to Protestants? So we have here in 1835 the two main threads of the Know-Nothing movement of the 1850s, immigration and Catholic schools. And we have an image here, it's a little bit later, of a public school teacher in a private school, Catholic school teacher, teaching in front of the class, but you see the shadow of the Pope in the background. A harbinger of all this could be discerned a year earlier than these books appeared in 1834, when, with some prompting by Lyman Beecher's anti-Catholic sermons in 3 Boston churches, the Ursuline Convent Academy in Charlestown, Massachusetts, was attacked the next day by a mob and burned to the ground. Ten years later, in 1844, Philadelphia became embroiled in the infamous Bible riots, an outgrowth of the battle of that city's Catholic bishop, Francis Patrick Kenrick, over reading the Protestant Bible in Philadelphia public schools. The riots erupted when Bishop Kenrick asked that Catholic children be allowed to read their own Bibles. Controversies over immigrants, Catholics, and education continued to spark confrontations between Catholics and Protestants. In 1852, New York Catholics began demanding public money for the support of their schools or the passage of laws forbidding the reading of Protestant Bibles in state-operated educational institutions. By 1854, nearly every northern state had experienced some sort of school funding controversy. Historian Ray Billington observed, from these controversies in the 1850s grew a popular hatred of Catholicism more openly expressed than at any other time in the history of the nation. The United States, born of revolution in 1776, was going through an identity crisis as the second and third generations after the war were coming to terms with what it meant to be a sovereign nation and an American. The nearly simultaneous deaths of founding fathers Thomas Jefferson and John Adams on the same day, July 4th, 1826, 50 years after the date we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, marked an important passing of the heroic revolutionary generation. With the election of Andrew Jackson in 1828, the Federalist aristocratic generation had passed from power, and the idea of a broader democracy was being tested. The power shift from a landed gentry to a more urban and rapidly industrializing population resulted in large-scale social unrest and social upheaval. A sense that something pure that had once been attained was now lost, an eerie echo of earlier Puritan ideas about Protestantism and our general theme of the fictions of purity. This idea began to develop, and two sources of pollution were easily identified: immigration and Catholicism. Immigrants continued to flow into the United States from various countries in the first half of the 19th century, including Catholic Ireland and the German states following the revolutions of 1848. In the early American Republic, immigrants were welcomed as workers who could help build the nation. According to historian Tyler Anbinder, from 1845 to 1854, nearly 3 million immigrants landed in the United States, more than had come in the previous 7 decades combined. In Boston alone, the foreign-born population increased 129% between 1845 and 1855, while the native-born population actually declined by 2% as some natives likely fled the city. So here's a slide. I just have the larger slide. It's from the Department of Homeland Security, and it's just a screenshot of the report, which you can see going from 1820 to 1909. And it shows patterns of immigration by year and country, but I did a close-up for the two that we really want to look at. It just looks at Irish and German immigration and the large increase in immigration of these groups. So you just see how the numbers jump leading up to the period under discussion, 1854 to 1856. We saw an enormous increase in the population of Catholics. There he is, the founder of public schools, Horace Mann. KnowNothings admitted that the country did need immigrants, so they didn't propose restricting the flow of newcomers as a means to preserve the homogeneity they valued. Their interest lay in assimilating the immigrants. This goal was also aligned with Horace Mann's Protestant vision for the common schools. The naturalization laws of this period required that immigrants live in the United States for 5 years before becoming an American citizen, and they were asked to then disavow allegiance to their former home. The Boston Know Nothing newspaper complained, "Foreigners are made American citizens all too rapidly." Some were alleged to have spent their probationary 5-year period in prison or in pauper homes, and there was also concern that immigrants were not even waiting the required 5 years to vote. Many nativists argued for a 21-year waiting period. They said people born here have to wait 21 years till they're 21. And the most radical wanted to restrict the vote to only those born in America. An important catalyst for the Know-Nothings was the 1852 election of President Franklin Pierce, a Democrat, and the defeat of the Whig Party was credited to the foreign vote. The agitation during the 1840s and early 1850s gave rise to the American Party, originally known as the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, founded by Charles B. Allen in New York in 1850. According to Ann Binder, the term Know-Nothing Party first emerged in November 1853, but its origins remain shrouded in mystery. The New York Tribune reported that a candidate for the New York District Attorney's election had lost through what they called a mongrel ticket termed the Know-Nothing. So we're not really sure how the term originated, but it did stick and it was embraced by its members. So this shadowy group, which had its run from 1854 to 1856, left virtually no paper records. But there are some interesting materials in the Library of Congress outlining the workings of one Know-Nothing lodge in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. So we do know a little bit more about them. Like a fraternity, the group developed grips, passwords, signs, phrases of recognition, and signals of distress for its members. To be initiated as a first-degree member, a candidate had to demonstrate that he had been born in the United States, that his parents were Protestant, and that he was not married to a Roman Catholic. Applicants placed their right hand on a holy emblem, and each had to promise and declare and swear upon that sacred and holy emblem before God and witnesses that they would not divulge or make known to any person whatsoever the names of any people that they see at the meetings, and they could not even admit that the organization existed. Applicants were asked if they or their families had been in the country during the Revolutionary War, suggesting that that war is indeed the origin of the nation's core political ideals. Members were asked to oppose the introduction of foreign paupers and criminals into the U.S. because their presence represented a possibility of corruption. Candidates were asked to renounce all party allegiance and abide by the will of the party in supporting its nominations for office. They vowed to work persistently for change in the naturalization laws, and before they could be given access to all the fraternal signs and secrets, they had to advance to the 2nd degree. The penalties for breaching the security of the society and revealing anything about it were severe. Excommunication, the posting and circulation of the perjuring traitor's name throughout all the different societies of the order, being blacklisted for employment, and fully unworthy, as they said, of the confidence of all good and honorable men. The traitor would become, alas, and here's the quote, "one at whom the finger of scorn shall ever be pointed." Historian Ronald Formisano calls this group and their ideology a form of patriotic masculinity. So holders of the second degree of membership could run for office. Once elected, their role would be to remove foreigners, aliens, or Roman Catholics if they had the power to do it, and they would never appoint them. What is so striking about the period leading up to the nativist heyday of the Know-Nothings is the amount of energy, ink, determination that went into what Billington has called the Protestant Crusade, an attempt to eradicate Catholicism from the United States. So the Know-Nothing popularity grew then out of fears that perceived outsiders threatened vast social changes that would destroy the pure American ideals imagined in the American Revolution. So what was their legacy? Well, in 1854 spring elections, they write-in candidates whose names had not even appeared on ballots were carried into office by the Know-Nothing support. By summer 1854, the Know-Nothings were the talk of the nation. Commercial interests took note of their popularity and developed products such as Know-Nothing candy, Know-Nothing tea, and Know-Nothing toothpicks. A New York clipper ship was christened the Know-Nothing. James Pierpont, the composer of the beloved Christmas song Jingle Bells, was a Know-Nothing who composed a Know-Nothing polka. Say it ain't so, James. Massachusetts was the scene of the party's greatest victories. In Boston and Salem, the party carried the 1854 mayoral elections. The governor and all state officers were Know-Nothings, and the Senate was entirely composed of representatives. All but three of 378 members of the House of Representatives were Know-Nothings. In keeping with their pledge, these new members swiftly moved to constitute a committee to investigate Catholic schools, which they called seminaries of learning under the control of the Roman Catholic Church. This became known as the Nunnery Committee, a form of nativist inquisition. On March 26, 1855, the committee presented themselves at the Academy of the Sisters of Notre Dame, a Catholic boarding school for girls in Roxbury, and they announced their intention to examine the premises. The superior, not thinking she had much of a choice, admitted them, and they proceeded to investigate all areas of the convent. Finding nothing amiss, the committee adjourned to the Norfolk House in Roxbury for a celebratory meal at the Commonwealth's expense, including copious amounts of champagne. Thus, they flagrantly violated the temperance law they themselves had just recently passed, and they were mercilessly mocked in this drawing by satirist David Claypool Johnston. And of course, one of their legacies is the Anti-Aid Amendment passed in 1855, something we will likely hear a lot about today. One of the most infamous incidents took place in Washington, D.C. during the construction of the Washington Monument, which was begun in 1848. To keep costs down, donations of stone from around the country and the world were accepted in honor of George Washington. The Know-Nothings objected to a slab of marble Pope Pius IX donated to the project. It had been taken from the Temple of Concord, built in 366 BC in Rome, and the Pope had it inscribed, "Rome to America." The Know-Nothings are alleged to have stolen it in 1854 and thrown it into the Potomac River. The night watchman was thought to have been a Know-Nothing, and the guard was locked in his watchman's cabin for more than 4 hours while the Pope's stone was carried off. And the Washington Monument, the Know-Nothings actually took over the control of that committee till 1858, but it was so badly managed that whatever part they oversaw had to be taken down and rebuilt, and it was not even completed till 1884. So we have a couple of takeaways here. The Know-Nothings developed a very effective strategy of block voting. Their members' allegiance was to the group, not to political parties, and they were able to gather mass support for candidates who supported the issues they identified as important. Their promise to preserve the Union had weakened by 1855, and this issue led to the splintering of their power before the Civil War. Organizing around issues such as temperance that cut across class lines gave them a stronger political base. So here are a couple of recent histories to just keep in mind. Our story of the Know-Nothings began with states refusing to support Catholic schools that would provide alternatives to the Protestant Bible and anti-Catholic curriculum content. In 1963, the Supreme Court ruled that the corporate reading of the Bible and the recitation of the Lord's Prayer was unlawful in public schools. Many think of this as banning prayer in the public schools, and there's a certain irony that it took 120 years. Catholics were trying to do it much earlier. And I want you to just think about how the same nativist ideology is being used in the current presidential election. Interestingly, about immigrants from another Catholic country, Mexico. You remember what Donald Trump said? Sounds very echoing of the Know-Nothings. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending the best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crimes, blah, blah, blah. So we have seen that Samuel Morse raised the alarm about immigration in 1835. Beecher tied it to Catholicism and schools the same year. Now, historians like Ron Formisano point out that the Know-Nothings have been marginalized by American historians as something of an aberration, a flash in the pan. And nativism and anti-Catholicism is deemed by historians as not truly embedded in American culture. But, I think such a rich mix of progressivism, economic and cultural pressures that form the Know-Nothing Party cannot really be straitjacketed into such a cartoonish and forgotten group. The period of nativism and anti-Catholicism, the Know-Nothing heyday, is something of an embarrassing history that we have. Returning to the idea of fictions of purity, anti-Catholicism and reform were, and probably remain, important parts of Anglo-American and Protestant culture. Protestantism, with its roots in protest, will continue to see itself in the light of liberal reform movements and revolutions, and will continue to regard Catholicism as largely aligned with reaction and suppression of progressive change. We are still poised to play out the battles of the 1850s when conditions caused their resurgence, and some of those conditions I think we're seeing very clearly today. Thank you.